I had the pleasure of meeting Mike O'Donnell in 2018 when he was the then director of sport for the PGA of America. And we have developed a relationship that has spanned that project. And I know Mike is going to introduce himself, but he is awkwardly, uncomfortably humble in terms of his accomplishments. So I am going to tell you that this person has coached at the highest level in Canada and the US. He was a former born in Canada in Campbell River, moved to the United States. So he's now living in Dallas, but he has served the gamut in terms of leading kids, leading sport organizations. He worked for Nike and ultimately ended up at the PGA of America as the director of sport. So he'll get into some of that stuff, but I'm always worried that he doesn't give himself enough credit. So without further ado, Mike O'Donnell, everybody.
Thanks, Matt. It's it's an honor to be invited to address each of you. I think like probably most people with coaching backgrounds, we typically see the better in others more than we see it in ourselves. And I'm certainly guilty of that. So Matt, in our very brief prep for this, asked me to go into some areas of my background that I don't typically talk about, not because I don't think they're relevant, at least to this topic of innovation and how to create better sporting environments, but because it really should be about you, right? The audience in this parlance, you're my students. And that's sort of the way I look at it. And students and players should always come first, right? So I don't think it's ever about the coach. I think it's always about the player and really about performance. A couple of caveats before we get into it. One, when I worked at Nike, I was there for almost 8 years, managing marketing and sports marketing for Nike Golf. The Nike IT department called me the technology black hole. So don't be surprised if I go into the share screen mode and we have a couple of glitches. That's very typical of any time I'm working with technology. So, don't be taken aback if I have to call on Taryn. Also, Matt mentioned the free flow nature. I think learning and becoming better at, in this case, innovation is really all about you and your context. So if you have a question, please ask it immediately, because if you're thinking it, at least half of the rest of the group is thinking it. And I'm really comfortable going in any direction that this goes in. So my intent here is really just to share a story about who I am, my background, and why I believe there's a massive gap, or I like the acronym LACK, leadership, accountability, and culture, in sport in general. I've been fortunate enough to work with many, many sport organizations through a lot of the sort of the groups that I've been involved with over the course of my career, and we'll get into that in a minute. And there's very, very common things, I think, to all sport orgs. And when I say sport orgs, I mean local club teams like Mary O'Donnell's Purple Panthers in the U12 Scottsdale, Arizona Soccer League, all the way up to the very highest levels of my sport, the Ryder Cup and the PGA Championship. So I'm going to sort of share that background and then share some conclusions. Hopefully I can do that in sort of 20 to 30 minutes. And if it all goes to plan, we'll have a good conversation. But again, please, along the way, if there's any question, please just ask it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And eventually I'll find presentation and we'll get to the T. Why can't I get this to full screen?
Just hit play and it should.
There it is. There it goes. Thank you. Okay. So, like I said, we've already sort of gone through the cadence of today, but really share a story, right? So who the hell is this guy, right? Who am I? As Matt said, I grew up in the middle of Vancouver Island with Shawnee Harley, by the way, who was a high school I'd like to say teammate, but seemed I was always matched up against her in basketball, and some of you have heard that story. I could never guard her. But certainly played a lot with her eldest brother, Shane, who we were the backcourt of the first team from our high school to qualify for the provincial championships. So something we're proud of, but long background. I was really, you know, and when you grow up in sort of small town British Columbia, especially on Vancouver Island, we affectionately call the Rock, you typically either stay there or you leave and sort of never go back. So at 18, I thought Campbell River was like the most boring place in the world. And I left, and ever since I've regretted it because I want to get back desperately, because I think it's probably the most beautiful place in the world and a really terrific place. But played all sports. I love to say I was a five sport high school athlete down here in the States, because everybody went to a high school with like 3,000 kids, and they think I'm a phenom athlete. But the truth is, the same 15 guys played all 5 sports. So it was just whatever the season was, we were playing it. And as I progressed through my coaching career, I really think that was an amazing blessing, right? To have all of these different sport experiences that I could draw from and connect with people who just had different sporting backgrounds, right? And I think that connection became really important. And when we talk about specific pathways to innovation and creating new and better futures, that ability to connect with people is absolutely essential. I think it's critical, as a matter of fact. So went from there, really just loved sport, and ended up in the golf business, mostly by accident, because I could actually make a living in sport. And was very fortunate to work for an incredible man who was way ahead of his time. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And that really just got me started in coaching, right? So from there, became the assistant coach of the Canadian national team, mostly because I was the only coach at the time working in biomechanics and sports psych and actually keeping some data and stats on player performance. All of that very commonplace now, but believe me, in 1988, nobody was doing anything like that at all. And then from there, became the head coach, coached at the World Amateur Team Championship. We finished in the top 10, which is a very big accomplishment for Canada in golf. And then got back into sort of the club business and grew community-based programs. That eventually led me to the States. A large company wanted to do for their 312 golf courses what I was doing at one golf course in Coquitlam, British Columbia. And did that, right? And we created programs at 84 locations that were teaching over 100,000 kids a year, and over 55,000, actually over 58,000 to be exact, adult new golfers. The majority of them were female, slight majority, like 57% of the new golfers. So coached at the international level, really good friends with a lot of professionals. So I'm not going to claim that I coached anybody who won a major championship because I haven't, but I have my students who've worked with me have won over 40 international amateur events and professional events. And then into sort of the admin side, right? So went to Nike from that grassroots program. Nike was just getting into golf in a serious way, and they wanted to do something really, really new and different. And in golf, it's very common for, they're called staff pros, the pros that work at golf courses align with an OEM, right? So you'd be with Ping or Titleist or Callaway or Srixon Cleveland or, you know, whoever, right? So I created that program. And one of the things that we did really differently there is I recruited a bunch of the top coaches in the world, and we created a special group we called the Bowerman Circle, because we wanted to highlight coaching, and Bill Bowerman was Phil Knight's coach when he ran track at the University of Oregon. And we really embedded, you had to have coached a major champion when they won their major to be in that club. And so we created this really cool synergistic environment between the product engineers developing the golf clubs and the apparel, and also the Nike Sport Research Lab, which is the biggest biomechanics and sort of physiology lab, non-military in the world. I believe that's still true. And then, so we had some great success there. We managed to, create a really cool company that since is basically, closed its doors long after I left, thankfully. And then the PGA of America came calling and said, "Hey, like we know we need to be better at coaching and player development, and could you please lead us in a new direction?" So I did that, and so I've worked inside NGBs. I've worked inside arguably the largest and most significant sports company in the world, at Nike. And I've worked at the very local level, like helping people learn how to play a sport and the steps to get them from desire to actually playing. And I've coached at the international level. So I think I have a kind of a cool background because it's not just in one area. And again, I can draw on all those areas when somebody says, like, well, what do we need to do to actually make sustainable change or something significant? So that's me in a nutshell, right? And I love Taryn and I love Matt. And whenever they ask me to do something, I'm happy to say yes. Okay, but mostly I'm this guy, right? So little Jack on the left is our first grandson. He cannot say granddad yet, so I'm Ganda to him. And little Tate, who's now just 2.5 months old, is on the right. So mostly I'm grandfather to these two, who are the sons of our daughter. So really that relationship has led me to really be consumed by, I think, these three questions. And I think all of us, when we reach the later stages of our career, although I don't think I'll ever retire or have any desire to retire, we start to think about legacy and we start to think about, like, how could the world be better and what can we do to help shape that? And so I'm really drawn by these three questions, right? Jack, for those of you that are Incredibles fans, right, will know the little baby's named Jack. That's how Jack is named Jack. I really want them to have incredible and exceptional sport experiences. And I've got, with my own children and myself and each of you, right, have very similar stories to this. So I don't feel like I'm unique in any way, shape, or form. But my daughter and son had amazing sport experiences and they had absolutely awful ones. And the absolutely awful ones led them to quit their sports, right? Matthew in hockey, when we were in Arizona, amazing experience. The Coyotes development system that they had created there was really terrific. Then we moved to Oregon when I went to Nike, and it was horrific. And one of my worst parenting moments was not confronting his coach when he grabbed two kids and by their face and was sort of shaking them, right? Thankfully, Matthew wasn't one of them. And our daughter, although hers were mostly positive, 3-time state champion, probably had the best example of coaching that I've ever seen in my life. Her name was Kristen Rukaber. She's still at Jesuit High School in Portland, Oregon. Never, ever focused on winning. Everybody knew their development plan, how they fit into the team. Even though it's a relatively individual sport, they were incredibly tight-knit. The parents were even tight-knit. Coach Rukaber was just this amazing sort of dynamo of everything you should do in coaching. Never focused on the record, although they did do this bagel thing, right? If you beat someone 6-0, then it's called a bagel. So they do a little bagel thing at the end of their matches for someone who won a set 6-0. It was amazing. This was the greatest sport experience I've ever seen. By the way, in 19 years, they'd never lost a league match, right? Without focus on winning. So it's very much possible. It was a great example to me. You can do well, do right, do good, and win. Those two things are not and should not be, especially at the high school level, which to me is still very much developmental. Those things should not be polar opposites or considered things that are, you know, at loggerheads. They absolutely are complementary, in my opinion. And so then if I really want that, and I think all of you want that for your constituents, right? Might not be as personal as your grandchildren or your children, but the constituents that you represent, they deserve exceptional experiences in sport. Everyone does, right? And we shouldn't let volunteerism or sort of mediocrity be the thing that drives us. Now, I think there's systemic things that need to happen to ensure that happens, but that should drive all of us, right? And then, so what do we need to ensure that? What are the things that need to happen within our sphere of influence or within our sports system that we need to take action on? Right. And then who ultimately is going to do it? And here's a little hint into what we're going to talk about in a bit, right? Is it's not someone else, right? Anybody who seeks innovation and seeks change and says, I'm doing the right thing, you are the people that need to change, in my opinion, is very much misguided. Okay. So all of that ain't going to happen without significant, in my opinion, significant structural or systems change. And by the way, I tend to be a systems type thinker, right? I see big systemic things very easily. I don't always see the tactical day-to-day application as, you know, as maybe as readily as someone like Matt does. Which I think makes Matt and I a good sort of synergistic team. But I'm not talking here, when we talk about innovation, I'm going to share some conclusions with you in a moment. I think it's significant change that's required, right? Both in the way we think about sport in sort of society, we'll just keep it to North America right now. We're going to talk about the sort of the Scandinavian countries in a few minutes. I think it's significant change that's required, not little incremental change. But we don't get to significant change without making little incremental changes along the way. It's that old, you know, Buddha statement that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right? So I wanted to and why do I think that way? Because of some of the things I've mentioned, but we're going to get that in some greater detail. This will be a timeline and sort of a realization journey on the sports structure. So I turned professional in 1986. Matt doesn't even remember 1986. That's how young he is. But I was incredibly proud and excited, right? I'd passed my player ability test, meaning I was a good enough player to wear this badge. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, you know, I'm still pretty much just a small town kid that didn't have a lot of experience in the world. And I thought, oh my gosh, this whole world now is open up to me. I'm part of this brotherhood and sisterhood that is going to change my life. I'm like, I can't wait, right? So I started to dig in, and it didn't take me very long before I became incredibly disappointed in the resources that were available to me. So there's a disconnect. And I think this is a systemic disconnect in every sport org. The people that are in the sport are looking to, let's just call it the NGB, right? The national governing body, Basketball Canada, Tennis Canada, Hockey Canada, whatever, to provide resources that are impactful to their daily lives, right? And share some stories around golf and that in a second. I think they'll be very common to what you said. So I was working at Fraser View Golf Course under Earl Francis at the time. And I thought, this is going nowhere. If I want to be a coach, I got to find somebody who's like best of class. So I went over to Shaughnessy Golf and Country Club in the University Endowment Lands at the University of British Columbia. And a man named Jack McLaughlin, who is arguably he's certainly one of the top 5 greatest golf coaches of all time, right? And the people that have come through that, sort of walk through those doors, is like a who's who, not just of golf in Canada. People like George Knudson and Mo Norman, and they were very close with Jack. So I got to hang out with those guys when I was 23 years old, right? Which is amazing. But also all the club pros that went on and did amazing things. And then in 1988, we hosted the Canadian Amateur, Ladies Amateur. and Canada didn't do so well. We were hosting the 92 World Amateur at Marine Drive and Capilano Golf Clubs in sort of West Vancouver and Vancouver proper. And the CLGA came to Jack and said, we need to change like this, we can't perform like this on the international stage anymore. So what do we do, right? And so Jack and we had a big staff, and I was the sort of the head teacher, if you will. He said, what do you want to do with your life? I said, I want to be a coach. He said, well, then let's bring you on. And this is when we started to collect data, right? And we kept all kinds of data. What happened when somebody took a lesson? Did they spend more money? Yes, they did. What short game metrics are important? What long game metrics are important? We started to track the body. We started to track the eyes. I did a lot more work in the Nike Vision Center later on. But we did really, really innovative, cool things at the time that today you would think are like laughable, right? But one of the things we did was recognizing that if Canada's not performing on the international stage to the level that we think they should, then we need to prop up coaching, right? And the CPGA, the Canadian Professional Golfers Association, certainly isn't doing it. So we created what became the Jack McLaughlin's Golf School for Golf Professionals, right? And this is around early '89. So I was kidding Taryn earlier. This is a presentation from chapter 13 on functions, right? On overhead projectors with these cellophane little things, right? So it wasn't high tech, believe me, but it had a big impact. Right. So we had, and it was, by the way, this is another, I think, great learning and insight is when we hosted the first one, we had about 40 golf professionals from all over the country, and they were from all of the top clubs. Right. So that was a little bit of a light bulb went off in my mind. The top people continue to invest in their careers. Right. And they don't rest. They don't think they've arrived. They think there's still a lot more for them to learn. So where we thought, and certainly I thought at the time, we would get way more of sort of these, sort of greenhorns, right? People that didn't know much. We got people who were very, very good already. And to this day, people who've attended those, we did them for, I think, 3 years. And then Jack passed away. Say it's the best golf education I've ever had. So that's whatever that is, 30 some odd years later, right? 30, what, 5. So then in 1990, Jack passed away, and I became the head coach of the Canadian ladies national team. If you're a golfer at all, you may remember the name Lori Kane. Lori went on to be #2 in the world. If it wasn't for Annika Sorenstam, she would have been #1. And Annika and her coach, Pia Nielsen, are close friends, Pia in particular, who we met in 1992 at the World Amateur, right, where Canada finished in the top 10. So those first sort of 4 dates, 86, 88, 90, and 92, were very much about the formation of high-performance coaching. And in 92, finally really got exposed to what I now understand to be good programming. Sweden was so far ahead of us in the way they prepared their athletes, the way they looked at the athlete, the wholeness of the athlete. Even back then, they were talking about multi-sport development through the formative years, functional movement, understanding that the body moves through 11 key joints in 3 planes of motion, and how to prepare the body well and stabilize and mobilize joints. I mean, just like light years ahead of us. And no surprise, they finished second. They lost in a playoff to Spain. But really, that sort of lit my fire, right? Like, okay, that's the model now. How do we sort of exacerbate that? So in '95, I got an opportunity to go to a brand new facility, opened it up. We did huge community-based programming based mostly on my very neophyte understanding of what Sweden was doing. So I started to think about the wholeness of the athlete, around 1992. And in 1995, it started to really take shape. And part of that was Lori, who became the #2 player in the world, wasn't even, in my opinion, the top 10 most talented athletes that I've ever coached, right? So big disconnect between performing on the international stage and athletic potential, right? Which is a fascinating, I'd love, we could sidebar here with Shawnee for a couple hours, I'm sure, around the people who actually make it. And I believe it's around neurology and belief systems more than it is around how quick they are in our sport, what their ball speed is, or how tight their dispersion pattern is, or their ability to control the golf ball in and around the green. Two names you've never heard of. If you're from Quebec, you may have heard of one. Evelyn Baron was the most talented athlete I've ever worked with. Evelyn's father owned the largest medical testing lab in the province. So she became the CEO of that. So she left golf to understandably run a big company and make a lot of money. And Tammy Dugan, who had a full ride to Ohio State, was an amazing, at 15, it looked like she was going to be the best player in the world, and probably would have been. But Tammy ended up, again, not a great sport experience, so left the sport, right? It's a shame. So 98 comes along, I'm running big programs, and a company called American Golf Corporation invites me to the United States to run those community-based programs at 300 facilities, so 312 to be exact. We ended up with 84 locations in a multi-year kind of rollout. So I had about 600 pros that I was responsible for their education, their development. We had very defined business outcomes that we wanted to achieve, which is really around increasing play at the golf courses. So we started a adult new golfer program. This is right at about the time, though, when parenting was switching and becoming much more about the children and doing what the children want to do rather than the kids sort of following, in my case, mom or dad to the golf course. So the junior program became a big impetus for that. So we ran that until the PGA of America took notice, and we were just crushing it there. I mean, 1,000 kids, over 1,000 kids per facility, learning to play the game and advancing up to at least the high school and college level. By the way, I still think college level is developmental, right? Not many people share that view, but I certainly do. And then the PGA called, and the PGA kind of said, okay, we want to redefine coaching and player development, and we think you're the best person to do that. And honestly, I had huge reservations, right? I'd been involved with a number of industry initiatives over the years and had seen the way they get manipulated and I don't mean manipulated in a bad way, but in the way that makes sense for that person's responsibility, which in the MGB world too often is a commercial responsibility before a developmental responsibility, right? So it took almost 2 years of going back and forth before I finally said yes. And got to work with Project Play a lot, we collaborated a lot with the USTA and a lot of tennis and golf initiatives, and really became known as the person who can take sort of coaching theory and put it into an implementing operating model at a facility and have it make sense for all the stakeholders, right? So the coaches make more money, the facility makes more money, the consumers have a great experience, and sort of everybody's happy, right? Believe me, the roadblocks that were put up in front of me while I was there were incredible. So what does that all mean, right? All of that background and working with different sport orgs, being invited to speak at conferences literally all over the world, and have this sort of recognition for both understanding what somebody needs, at least in golf, to compete at the very highest levels of the game, and also build grassroots programming, right? And I would say this, right? The current sports system lacks leadership, accountability, and culture. You've probably heard FSQ folks talk about purpose, vision, mission, and values, right? And I think, and again, I think you have to go long and hard to find a bad person in sport, right? Everybody is well-meaning. I think everybody has a genuine love and desire to make things better, but there's no structure around that process to make it better, right? And there's certainly no accountability. When you work at the NGB level, they run away from objective measurement like you wouldn't believe. And I can't tell you how many. I was just speaking with the USOPC at what they call their American Development Model Conference, and everybody just, as soon as it's about, okay, well, who's accountable for actually growing your sport, right? Increasing the number of participants, which you would think would be an NGB core sort of building block, right? Like if we don't exist to grow our sport, then why are we even here? And nobody puts up their hand. Nobody. Well, nobody's. Well, or it's this, right? They are at the local level, or they are at the state level, or the provincial level, but not me. So that's a huge opportunity to make things better in a really, really quick way. And this is something I'm passionate about. You're going to see the remarks that are highlighted in red are maybe some opportunities for me to get on a soapbox. When I say we, I mean sport in general, right? We keep making the same mistakes because we don't understand the problem, right? I've got copies of 3 different manuals here by my side. And there's this notion in every NGB meeting I've been in every project play meeting I've been in every 41 of the PGA of America section meetings that I've been in, they talk about we need a marketing program, right? I'm going to be blunt for a moment. You do not need marketing, right? There's not a Canadian alive that doesn't know what basketball is. Not one, right? What they need is an amazing experience when they first come out. That's the first step, right? Whatever that is. I just use basketball because that's my first love and because I saw Shawnee on here earlier. There's not a person in America who doesn't know what golf is, right? You talk about the world's most recognizable brands, Apple, McDonald's, Nike, right? They have like 97% market share. Golf has 100, right? So look, there's economics for every family. I totally get that. But what's preventing somebody from participating, right? It's not that they don't know it exists. It's that the experience when they first come out either compels them and draws them in, and that has to be at an emotional level, or it repels them. And often that comes down to the local coach, right? Here's the second issue, right? And I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth for an example. The other thing that everybody says is we need coaching education. Sort of, we do, right? But, and this is one of my big bones when NGBs develop curriculum. They ask the wrong question at the start. The first question to ask, in my opinion, when you develop curriculum isn't what is the desired learning outcome, right? That is not the right question. And because we ask that question, that creates our curriculum design, right? Everything from the curriculum flows from that. And at the local level, what they need is what is the performance outcome we desire? And those performance outcomes are 2 things, in my opinion. And there's lots of tentacles off these 2 things. The first one is increase in participation, right? If Canada is going to win an Olympic gold medal in basketball, they need, certainly one in a million athlete, and then 4 or 5, 10 in a million athletes. Well, the first thing you need is a million athletes, right? So focusing on sport participation first, especially in the, let's call it the 7 to 12 to 13-year-old range, is a critical data point for the health of that organization, right? So I think those 2 things are critical. Yes, we need coach engagement, but it can't be about how to dribble a soccer ball or how to kick it. Those things are very important, but it's really about how do you create an amazing experience? That's the first thing, right? And then all the other stuff can ladder on top of that. And then here's a big one, right? The financial model is broken, right? And NGBs really, certainly in the United States, I'm way more familiar in the United States than I am in Canada, but I am familiar with Canada. They're focused on events. That's how they get money from running events, membership fees, and sponsorship, right? Now, financial survival is real, right? You're not going to be able to open your doors if you can't afford it. So those things are legitimate, but they cannot be subservient to development and the consumer experience. So in my mind, most NGBs should be bifurcated, right? And you should have this revenue side and you should have this development side. The problem is that in 100%, the commercial interest will override the development interest. In other words, TELUS really wants to do this particular sort of spin, right? And they're going to pay us $5 million or 500,000 or 5,000. So TELUS wants to see, I don't care what it is, just ... right? So that then becomes the focus of development, not the actual development of the athlete. So there's not a clear development pathway, which is sort of point number 6. And I think the most critical question for the parent and for the child, where am I in my development and what comes next? And that has to be whole, right? This BS that sport develops character, yes, if you have a great sport experience, and it also ruins character. I've seen both, you've all seen both sides, right? Kids crying at 10 years old, their self-esteem absolutely shot, like really negative things, because the desired outcome and the understanding of how to get there isn't understood. Look, I want Canada to win every gold medal, right? I do. I'm as patriotic as they come, and I'm as competitive as they come. I want to win everything. But, you know, somebody asked me once, who's the greatest golfer of all time, right? And you might be surprised by my answer. I said, we don't know, because some coach screwed them up before they could get to the PGA Tour or the LPGA Tour, right? And I'm an example of that, right? I've had a couple of them. But anyway, so because we're not, there's almost no focus on the development of the athlete at the NGB level. There's almost no focus on a consumer experience, right? And I'm jaded here a little bit by my Nike training, and I was very fortunate because I was ID'd as a potential leader in the company. So I got to go to these special sort of development programs. One was called Line of Sight and one was called Finance Matters. It was really about understanding consumer motivations and understanding, you know, how you develop and place products for those folks. The consumer decides, everybody, right? We can think we're the greatest thing in whatever we do, and my credentials don't matter to, you know, the local mom and the local daughter who want to participate in sport, right? It really doesn't matter. What matters is, am I providing them with something that is of value to them and they see that they want to spend time in? Once they're hooked, we can get them into all the development stuff, right? And here's the other, parents want good, they don't want free, right? So I admit my background is mostly in a more affluent sport, but don't think that all golfers are affluent. The average green fee in America is just over the price of a movie ticket. So, you know, a green fee, if you're not a golfer, just means your 18-hole fee, right? Stands at not much more than a movie ticket. So it's not like it's only, you know, these privileged elitist folks that participate in the sport. But parents they want what's good for their child, right? They might not know what's good, right? From a sport perspective, but they're willing to pay for it. So we should be focused on excellent product design and delivery, and then secondarily, sort of what is the structures we need to put in place to support that, right? Whatever that product is, right? It could be an intro to basketball in Stanley Park in Vancouver, right? But that should be excellent, and it should have a follow-up and a next step and where you go from here, right? Instead, it's just, yeah, a bunch of kids came out and they learned how to dribble and now they went off to the beach, right? That's not good enough. And here's something else that I'm particularly passionate about is I really believe that the government grants are soon going to go away. And it's going to be really around crushing debt levels, right? We cannot, I'm not as familiar with debt levels in Canada as I am with the United States, but the United States now spends $89 billion a month just on debt service. So if it's not gonna happen by our elected leaders in America, it's going to happen by the IMF and just by the devaluing of the dollar, right? So this idea that we can continue, I believe in public policy, don't get me wrong. I believe in exceptionally good public policy for sport, but public policy on its own is not the answer, right? It has to be there, but it's public policy plus active local leadership that drives participation, and participation always comes before performance. Okay, so I think that's a big problem. So I wanted everybody to just read this. I'm not gonna read it out loud, but this is something that I really truly believe. I'm actually involved with some private equity groups right now, and I'm a little fearful, quite frankly, of private equity and what it could do. But it's coming, and it's coming fast. And when it gets here, they move, right? There's not going to be, we need to have a town council meeting, and then we need to form 11 committees, and those 11 committees need to come back and get together, and it's going to move, right? And what I'm really fearful for, or for the people that I love, like all of you, and people who dedicated their lives to sport, being made irrelevant because they haven't acted in a way that's meaningful for the consumer, right? And I think with that, so what do we do about all that, right? My steps to doing something. Well, I think the first one is set your mind right? Don't be afraid by change. I think evolution is probably a better word. Because to change is just, it's a process, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. Matt mentioned that, in 2018, when I returned from a Project Play conference, and Craig Snyder, who was head of coaching at the USOPC then, had made mention of Matt Young. I said, Craig, don't do anything. I want to speak to Matt Young. So introduce me, and he did. And so Matt and I have been working together, not on a daily basis, but we talk on a fairly frequent basis, at least once a month, and around this whole idea of change for 6 years, with not a ton of progress. But each day the building blocks get a little bit more entrenched. People, sort of jump on the boat like all of you have. And it just takes time to fix those roads. So set your mind right? It's not going to happen overnight. And then, 2, develop a vision for a better future. And then find people, partners who can help you, right? And you'll find that there's a lot more people who share this passion for better sport than you realize. I was quite surprised. I'm surprised that there's this many people that show up on a Thursday afternoon for a call. And then identify and understand who the key stakeholders to get on board are. This is a mistake that I've made over and over again in my own career, right? I'm usually a very good strategic planner. I'm very good at seeing systems. I'm also very good at sitting alone in a room and designing all these really cool things that I think are great, and then not sharing them with the right people, right? So you got to find out who the decision makers are, who the stakeholders are, and invite them in, right? Don't make it about you, make it about them. And that's really about what point number 4 is. I think it's really, really important to understand each of those stakeholders' motivations. And remember, the vast majority of people make decisions based on emotion, not rational thought. And most people in sport, and I'm talking about the very highest levels of sport, Pete Bavacqua is a good friend of mine. He used to be chairman of NBC Sports. He's now the AD at Notre Dame. He was the CEO at the PGA of America when I was there. Phil Knight, right? Like all of these types of people are still trying to figure it out, right? They haven't got to the point where they think, you know what, I've arrived, and they still have things that they're concerned about, right? Whatever those things are. So if you can understand them and then speak to how you can make their world better, meet them more than halfway, so that they see a win in whatever that innovation or change is that you think is necessary. That's really, really important. And make sure you make their life easier or better. And then it's just about beginning a dialogue with each stakeholder and then pivoting where necessary. And I think, again, if you want to use me as the person who's made more mistakes than anyone on this call, I know I have. Um, that's another mistake that I've made. All right, I haven't pivoted because I've got this amazing plan. You know, that's sort of like, don't you understand how much work I've put into this plan? This, like, you know, this is amazing. You should love this, right? Is be flexible enough to pivot, right? To understand that yes, commercial interests are valid and they need to be included in what you do. And that may include bringing in a sponsor who doesn't exactly fit your development model or the change or innovation that you want to do. You still need to work within that process. And it's really about, if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, it's about the infinite game, right? It's about staying in the game long enough and being engaged long enough so that at the end of your career, you can look back and say, well, I made really significant impact and improvements, and I feel really good about my time on this earth because I was able to contribute to a better world, right? And I do believe that sport is a ticket to a better world. We're about to, you know, go to the Olympic Games in Paris, and it's one of the few times where you're going to see the world come together, right? And you got dealing with Ukraine and Israel and Hamas and all the things that we deal with on a geopolitical basis, never mind at the local level. Try living in Dallas, Texas in the presidential year and go out and try to have a conversation with somebody over a drink. It's not very pleasant, right? It's certainly not happy. So sport is a way to unify people. It's a way to unify communities, create communities. And ultimately, if we do it well, I really do believe we can create a better world through sport. So thank you for your time. I see some chat things up there. I should have warned you as well that if you don't interrupt me, I'll just keep going. So, and this is how, if I can be of any help to you, you want to schedule a personal call. My fee is expensive. I don't know if many of you can afford zero. But I'm happy to spend any time with you at all if I can be of help, right? I'm happy to chat through any of this with you privately. So I usually respond better to text. Email for me is sometimes challenging, right? I'm still this guy who uses overhead projectors and can't figure out how to go to the full screen mode on his laptop.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Mike. And I
That's
know
it.
if you want more of a quicker response, you can always put a picture of a cute dog and Mike will definitely get back to you faster. Mike, really appreciate your time. And also just, you know, if you want to pull up that slide where you showed the 7 challenges you see in sport, I think that's a really good taking off point. There's so many different topics that I think you covered and that we could get into. And I know we have 10 minutes, so I'm going to open it up to Q&A. But just want to say thank you, first of all, for everyone's time and the work that you've done and continue to do in sport. I know that you, just like you said, you do give your time generously and have conversations with people to try to make sport better and support each other and through that innovation. So I'm going to put this up because I think there were a lot of topics on here that I think people on this call will want to come back to. I'm going to open it up to questions. Feel free to unmute yourself or just put it in the chat. I know I always have a million questions with you and we can talk about a lot of these for hours, but I'll open it up to this group first and before I jump in. So if there's anyone who wants to throw in a question or unmute, go ahead. And I know it's always like, who's going to be the first one? But Shawnee, I see you unmute yourself, so go ahead.
You know, I was looking at slide number 2. We make the same mistakes because we don't understand the problem. which is another way of saying we're solving a lot of problems, but it doesn't help if they're not the right ones. When I think about all that you said, and I think about how big this thing is, what would you tell people on this call, or people that are going to call it after, or get on the call and watch the recorded version, if they were going to start in just one place? Because if we're not solving the right problem, we're not going to get the answer we're looking for. What would be the number one thing that they should do that would bring the biggest return on investment for that specific problem that they identified? So in other words, right, there's this saying, there's 9 ways to skin a cat. Depends on the cat, depends on the tool being used, and it depends on the person skinning the cat. What would be the best way to skin this cat?
Well, Taryn just said I'm a dog guy, so I would say, why do you have a cat?
Yeah.
But I think, Shawnee, my answer would be slightly different based on where somebody is sort of in that, what I'll call the sports system, right? So are you at a national governing body? Are you at a local club? Are you at a local, community-based or provincial sport org? So it's a little bit different, but I think the best way to think about it is, who are my constituents and how do I best serve them? And if you're at a local club level, it would be the parents, right? So I'm just a huge believer in feedback. So I would ask my constituents, like, what can we do to provide a better experience for you and your child? If I'm at a provincial sport org, I would ask all the clubs that form my member base, like, what can we do that will make your life easier, your life better? And if I'm at a national level, right, and you coached at the Olympics, and you coached, the Canadian national team, so you understand that you're only as good as the system that's creating players for you, right? So that becomes more of a systemic type question. And again, if our goal is to win the Olympic gold medal or the world championships or whatever it is, it's got to be, to me, way more early in the development cycle on what are we doing to prepare these kids ultimately for a moment in time that's very fleeting, right? And I don't want to take up too much time here. I'm super interested to talk to you about, what happened in Brazil when somebody crumbled. That had nothing to do with their first step or their ability to release the ball or make a pass or block out, or right. It had something else, right? And we need to be developing that something else. I like to characterize it as Wade Gilbert does in the 4 C's, right? Character, connection, confidence, and competence. And those things should be being built, not just to win a world championship, by the way, but to perform in life. So I think it's different based on where you are in sport. I'm not sure I really answered your question. I hope I did, but who are your constituents and how can you best serve them?
Thanks, Mike. I know that's a question, and Shawnee, between the two of you, we could probably sit and spend the day talking about a lot of these points. So appreciate that, Mike. I know the starting point, agree, a lot of it is getting feedback, because what you might think in your seat is really important is completely different from your consumers and your different stakeholders. So that broad perspective and sort of 360 is a great way to start. I'll open it up if anyone else has a question.
Hello, I have a question. I am Alessa Zaglada. I'm a founder and vice president of People Sport Foundation. We are supporting people with disabilities. What advice do you have for the sport of people with disabilities?
Well, Alessia, first of all, thank you for not only your question, but what you do, right? I think it's incredibly important.
Thank you.
I see the world, I think, differently than many people, right? And so when I say sport, I mean sport for everybody, right? Including people that are, I don't like the word disabled, it's it my experience is somewhat limited working with disabled athletes, but what I've found is a much higher willingness to participate and learn and adapt. And in many ways, I've found it easier to work with people with disabilities because they're so they're so much more appreciative and thankful and just want to be included, right? So when you think about what I said earlier about sports' ability to bring people together and build community, and again, it's easier for me because I'm in golf, right? And most of my time is in golf. So it's easy to go play golf with somebody who's disabled because it's an individual sport, right? But I don't understand why people that are disabled can't be part of regular programming at the club level. I don't mean regular that it's better or different, but just if there's a local soccer club, the Coquitlam FC, why doesn't Coquitlam FC also have like a disabled element to that, right? And sports should be inclusive and honestly, as part of public policy, if you're on public land, frankly, you should have that as just built into what you do. That's easy for me to say because I don't understand all the issues. And again, I'm from golf, so it's easy for us to easier, I think, for golf to say a golfer to say something like that because we can implement. But I guess that's me taking up airtime saying I don't really know. But it's an important part of everyday life in our world, and disabilities should be part of every organization's plan.
Mm-hmm. And it's a great question point. We'd love to talk about it further. I know we only have about 2 minutes, but one of the
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and one of the projects we're
you.
working with Tennis Canada with is helping them with their wheelchair tennis whole player development pathway. So how are we taking a lot of the concepts that Mike just talked about in terms of those C's, how we're integrating it into their player development pathway. So really interesting work, and happy to follow up after to set up time just to talk about specifically in that space what there can be done and how we can focus on it. So really appreciate the question. We have time for one more question.
The
Yep,
other
go ahead,
thing,
Mike.
the other thing I would just add to that is every athlete is a human being before they're an athlete, right? So what are the human elements that can connect people and bring them together and you know, create community, create togetherness, create a connection so they want to continue to participate.
Exactly. We always talk about developing great humans and great players. So it's like it's really as people first, athletes second. We have time for one more question. So if anyone wants to speak up, I believe Neil, you're unmuted. If you had a question, jump on in.
Hi, Mike. Neil Purvis from Ottawa. I'm the head of a independent school phys ed program and athletic director. And I guess one of my questions is about, you know, families and kids knowing that only a small percentage of athletes become pro, and that there's financial ties and costs associated with that and potential income down the road. Is that stopping participation in your mind? Is it something that's affecting getting kids started, knowing that there's this only a small percentage are going to, you know, let's say in golf, 1% are going to make it despite all the effort, time, money spent? How do we combat that battle and still get them involved in sport at a young age?
Well, I mean, that's just soapbox time, right? That's just bad parenting, right? In my opinion, we need as sport, we need to do a much better job of selling the benefits to everybody for participation in sport, right? And as you're in education, and I'm not familiar with the latest literature, but everything I've ever read says academics improve when people move their bodies, right? Health, just general health improves. I'm entering this stage of life where being with my grandkids and being able to roll around on the floor and being able to just enjoy time with them is infinitely more important than my golf score, right? And we need to do a better job of helping people understand that if you learn to move your body correctly, and every single person can do it, right? Every single person. I don't care what you know, what the excuse is. It's only 3 planes of motion through 11 key joints. And if we stabilize and mobilize those joints, we can move, right? We might not be able to be, we just had US gymnastics and we might not be Simone Biles, right? But we can certainly move and function. So I think that is the biggest benefit to participation in sport is lifelong health, wellness, and happiness. That's the first step. If then you can play for the Ottawa Senators one day, God forbid they end up as a Senator and not a Canuck, then that's great, right? But if the parent is saying like, there has to be money at the end of this, or we're wasting our time, that to me is way, way out of context. And by the way, it's way less than 1%, right? It's like 0.001. It's like 1 of every 10,000 are ever gonna play and make money doing playing a sport. So yeah, I think context at the front end. Why do we have physical education, right? Why should we? Why should your child be doing these basic fundamental movement skills every single day? Right? I still can't believe that the government of Canada, if, again, in public policy, hasn't provided every single Canadian citizen with a free app that helps them understand how to move, right? For no other reason than it will reduce healthcare costs, right? So, sorry, Neil, I'm not sure if I answered your question either, but that's a real passion point for me.
Thanks, Mike. I was just waiting to see. Perfect. Well, I know there's probably more. We'll ask one more question. If those have to drop off, we will send the recording following. I'll just ask the one question that's in the chat from a community club. Would you agree that the other key stakeholder, along with parents, is the municipality as facility provider? Do you have any guidance in that regard? And sorry, Mike, before I let you answer that, talking about fundamental movement skills and teaching them, we have tons of videos on our YouTube channel of how do you assess and teach the main fundamental movement skills. So if there is a organization or school that needs support, there is tons of free resources out there, and we're happy to have that conversation. So yes, Michael, I'll open it up to that
I didn't
question.
even know FSQ had a YouTube channel.
We do. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
You will be on it, Mike. You will be on it.
Please.
You'll be the star of it. So we do have a lot of those videos. But Mike, the question, as a community club, would you agree that other key stakeholders, along with parents, as the municipality, they are the facility provider? Any
Absolutely.
guidance? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, 100%, right? So I don't have a lot of experience dealing with municipalities except in the golf context, right? Where there's a number of municipalities own golf facilities. And it's usually either a bit of a green space, sort of, hey, we want to make sure we meet our green space requirements. Or it's a profit center, right? I started my career working for the Vancouver Parks Department at Fraser View Golf Course. And it generated millions of dollars that basically funded the 7 golf courses that the city owns, funded a lot of what they did, right? Stanley Park wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the Vancouver golf courses. That's probably an overstatement, but I think you get what I mean. Yeah, the municipality is absolutely a critical partner and stakeholder. And I think it really becomes, you talk about municipalities, it becomes generally around budgets when it becomes, field care and upkeep and the wear and tear and the cost to maintain them. And I think that for me, we always talked about public health benefits, right? Both social and physical, right? And again, our context is, our core consumer is 55 to 75, right? Where else are they going to go to be outside and spend time with friends and get exercise if it's not golf? Right? So easier. Again, I think I'm always grateful for these types of opportunities because I feel like my life is easier than yours, and that's a good thing. But the municipality is a key stakeholder. They need to be able to understand the the value of community-based sport, right? And I think it's two things. The most important one, I think, is actually pride in the community and togetherness in the community, which brings up an interesting question. And a possible point of innovation is, why do we even have like teams at a certain age, right? Why don't we just have like play days when all the 10-year-olds are out at the playing soccer from, you know, whatever, 6 o'clock at night till 8 o'clock at night, right? Why do we have to have a coach and a team? And right, so there's opportunities to innovate in that space for sure. But yeah, they're a critical stakeholder. I think you've got to include them, and they've got to see their work as critical to the health of the people that they serve.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, I'm just going to add to that, because this morning we were actually doing board governance and DEI training with the soccer club out east. And one of the points around municipalities as a stakeholder was risk management. If they take away your facilities, what do you do? If they lose their funding, what happens to your programming? So being able to work with them and see not only helping them provide that value to the community, but knowing what their long-term plan is and how you fit in it is really important, because if that piece disappears, you're in response mode and you're just being reactive. So we had a really interesting discussion around that as part of governance planning and long-term partnerships. So appreciate the question, Alex. And I'm sure, Mike, you've got way more to say on that. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we've gone a few minutes over. Like I said, Mike is one of those incredible people who is very generous with his time, his experience, and his knowledge. So if there is anything you wanted to discuss further, please feel free to reach out with us. We will share this recording. I'm sure there's a lot of questions that will come and spark everyone's minds after this as well. But again, thank you, Mike, so much for your time, and everyone for joining us on this Thursday afternoon for most. I think with the time zones that most people are joining us, we did hit that lunch to later afternoon. So appreciate it and hope everyone has a great day. And we look forward to making sport better. It starts with conversations like this. So thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, and just to wrap up, please don't be bashful about reaching out. I'm happy to chat with you about anything at any time. And you know, I do think I have a wealth of experience that could be helpful, but I don't have every answer either. And obviously the municipality question was much better answered by Taryn. So I'm happy to pass you along to whoever I think is better than me. And then you'll be passed along a lot.
So it usually goes, it takes a village, right? Well, thank you so much, everyone. And we will send out this recording, if not tonight, tomorrow. And we look forward to many more of these discussions.
Bye-bye. Thank you all so much.